Welcome to the High Stakes Customer Podcast. I'm your host, Adrian Davis, and I'm really looking forward to going on this journey with you, where we're going to explore really insightful methodologies that I've come across and that I've developed over the decades that I've been in sales. And we're going to just together explore what does it take to really be successful with the high stakes customer. I want to start, though, by sharing my personal story. And it's just an opportunity for you to get to know where I come from and what has led me to this commitment to help others be successful with their most important customers. So I'll just take a moment and just go back in time. So first of all, I have to tell you, I've been in sales for 4 decades, and it has changed tremendously since I began in sales. But there are some things that haven't changed. And I want to talk about that, the difference between timeless principles and things that are new and current and that we have to adopt and adapt to. But in terms of how did I come to be in sales? And it really starts out just going back. I have to go back in time to my childhood. And unfortunately, I was born into, I would say, a troubled home, a home of domestic violence, which my siblings and I witnessed as young children who felt very, very helpless. And I can remember a particular day when I witnessed this domestic abuse, my father beating up my mother. I was 6 years old, and I just observed this, and I was terrified. I was helpless. I felt there's nothing I could do. And I remember saying to myself, when I grow up, I'm going to get married, and I'm going to do it right. I didn't even know what that meant. I just know that what I was witnessing was wrong, and I formed a vision of wanting to do it right. And that stayed with me until I got married. In fact, I was very careful about who I married. And I just recently, I should say next year, this coming April, will celebrate 35 years of a very happy, very successful marriage. And so I see in that sometimes the things that we experience in life, the setbacks that we experience can actually propel us forward. And I think not only in my personal life did this propulsion forward happen, but also in my business life. And I have to really thank my father for this. And I don't want to say my father was all bad. I did get to know him as a young man, and I learned a lot from him, and he did guide me in very positive ways. But he did impact me in negative ways that I had to basically say I'm going to do the opposite. And so I think because of that early experience, I became fascinated by relationships. And really wanting to understand what makes relationships, whether personal or professional, what makes them successful. And so that was always an orientation that I had in the back of my mind. Now, when it comes to applying this to business, I think because of that unfortunate start that I had in family life, as a teenager, at first I was a very happy-go-lucky teenager. My mother basically had to run for her life and take her 4 kids with her. And so we fled. We lived at Sarnia at the time. We fled to Toronto, and I grew up in Toronto, Canada. But initially, I would say I was just this happy-go-lucky kid, kind of the class comedian. And then as I turned 15, 16, I just changed. I became very serious, very philosophical, and very troubled, to the point where I just became unmanageable. I became very bored with school. I can actually remember sitting in the classroom at 17 years old and just looking at the teacher. He was writing an algebra equation on the blackboard. If you can remember what a blackboard is, some of you may be too young to know that. But I was sitting in the room and I just think I'll never use this knowledge. This is a complete waste of my time. And so I quit school. Long story short, that led to a period of homelessness, managed to get my feet somewhat on the ground, became a taxi driver, but just was not successful. Was just falling further and further behind, was on the verge of being evicted, knew that there's no way I'm going to be homeless again. And so I can remember I woke up one day just totally exhausted. And just I was 19 at the time. And I just thought, I've got to go back to school. I realize now that school might not teach me the meaning of life, but it can teach me how to make a living. And so I became very clear as to why I needed an education and decided to go back to school. At the same time, I reconnected with my father, and he offered to, that I live with him so that I wouldn't have the expenses, have less expenses, and I'd also get a chance to get to know him Another long story short, that became unmanageable, very difficult. I began to realize why my mother had to flee from him, because I myself had to flee from him, feeling that my life was being threatened. And I once again was at the risk of being homeless, at the risk of having to drop out of school. And I thought, I've come too far to drop out. And so I can remember basically just leaving my father. I won't go into the details there, but it was very dysfunctional. And going to the school and explaining to them the situation I was in. And they actually offered me a job. I had to do some coding of books in a library. And they also just provided a place for me. So I got a job they were able to provide a job for me, a part-time job, and a place for me to live. But the money that I would get from the part-time job was not enough. And I'm leaving out some details here, but I was in a bit of a bad situation. And so at the time I was reading a lot of books about entrepreneurialism, because I always had this dream of wanting to be in my own business. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to start a company. I'm going to start an advertising company. And so that's what I did. And I created a publication for students with advertising spaces. And I basically hopped on my bicycle and went around to all the retailers that I thought would want to reach the university market. And I was reading about sales and entrepreneurialism, and I created a bit of a presentation as to why this publication was so valuable. And I also did a little bit of a calculation for them as to what their return on investment would be, depending on so I showed them how many students would be exposed to these ads. And, if they had this percent of response, or if they had this percent of response, like, at 1% response or a 0.5% response or a 2% response, these are the number of leads that you would generate. And I look back, like, that was pretty breakthrough, but I guess it was the books that I was reading at the time. But I had such a joy in going to these different retailers and talking with them, and some would ask me to come back and some were not interested, but I was just relentless. I was like knocking on every single possible door that I could. And if they told me to come back, I'd make a note and I'd go back to them. And I was quite fit, actually, because I was all over the city on my bicycle, but I really loved it. And I just thought, I love this. Like, why do people look at sales as, dishonest, that sort of used car salesman perspective? That's the way most people saw sales. I saw it totally differently. I looked at this and I thought, in fact, I felt for the first time that I was creating value, that this is how I can show up in the world and really create value. And I could remember, it was probably a cassette tape or something that I had listened to, but it said that nothing happens until somebody sells something. And so I just fell in love with sales. And I thought, I want to be a professional salesperson. But not just that I wanted to be a professional salesperson. I thought to myself, I want to be a professional salesperson and prove that it can be done with integrity, that we can succeed with integrity. So I was on this mission to be successful, but to be successful with honesty and with integrity. And so I read everything I could. I was always in the bookstore buying books and reading on professional selling. And also I love technology. And so I had this sort of dual love. I was introduced to technology when I was in university, and I just took to it. And so I ended up going in a path of technology sales. In fact, I can remember my first job was with a company called LinkTech, and they had an ad in the paper. And so I wrote a heartfelt letter to the vice president, who was actually one of the owners. I didn't know, but I just responded to his letter, and to his classified ad, and I sent in this letter. And they called me up almost right away and interviewed me. And he just told me how much he appreciated the letter. It was really heartfelt. And so I hired them, and I was an inside salesperson. And my job was to book appointments for professional salespeople. They had a software package that they were selling to government executives. PCs were new at the time, and network PCs were just this innovation, this great breakthrough. And so a lot of the government executives were depending on reports from the mainframe computer that they'd get once a month. And their innovation was to create a similar budget tracking technology or software that was on the mainframes, but to put it on PCs and to put it on a networked PC. Or on a network, so that everybody could be tracking their expenses and know exactly where their budget was and not wait for a report that was out of date, and know in advance what they call them commitments, what the future expenses were going to be, and always have a pulse on their balance of their budget. And so that's what they were hiring me to do, is to set appointments where another company, was a KPMG, and they had another consulting company that would go in and have these, meetings in the field to sell them on moving from mainframe to PC-based tracking, budgetary tracking and planning. So I was good at it. I was relentless. I'd pick up the phone and call. We would mail letters, and then we would follow up by phone. And so that's what I did. And again, I was just relentless, and I was good at it and was very good at booking appointments. But all the time when I'm booking these appointments, my heart was to be in the field. I was like, I want to be out there. And so I sat with his name was Kevin, fantastic mentor, fantastic person. And I'm so glad that I had him as my initial sales mentor, because I had some mentors later, which were horrible. But that's another story. But he had integrity, and he was very good. And I could tell he was rooting for me. He really admired me and wanted me to be successful. And I was very good at this telemarketing or booking appointments for salespeople, but I wanted to be a salesperson. And so one day I sat down with him and said, I want to go into sales. And he just discouraged me. He said, Adrian, you're really good at this telemarketing. What we can do is we're going to build a whole department. You can lead that department, and we'll build that up under you. And, it sounded fine, but just that wasn't in my heart. What was in my heart was I wanted to go out and meet with people. And they were we were turning over the leads in the meetings, setting up the meetings for these salespeople, but they were just not being successful. And I felt like I can do this. So what happened is, I was in Ottawa at the time. That's where I went to school, and that's where I started with this company, LinkTech. And KPMG had an office in Toronto that was doing this. And I wanted to move back to Toronto, be back with my family, be back where I grew up. And so KPMG offered me a job. They said, we will hire you because you really understand this technology, and we're having difficulty selling it, so we'll hire you. So that's how I came back to Toronto and worked for KPMG, and I became their salesperson. And I was out in the field, just really enjoying what I was doing. I'm going to make this short here, but I ended up going back to LinkTech when they opened an office in Toronto. And then, again, now I was now credentialed as a salesperson. They knew I could do this. So they hired me back as a field salesperson. And I was out there making appointments and selling. And then, because I was good at technology, Kevin came to me one day and he handed me a brochure. And the brochure I had never seen this before. We were using a software package called ACT at the time, the contact manager. I then migrated to Maximizer, which was also a contact manager, but it did a better job of B2B, whereas ACT is more B2C. And he just saw how quickly I could adopt to technology. And so he could put a brochure on my desk. He said, Adrian, can you check this out and tell me if you think we should migrate to this? And it was from a company called Onyx, and it was about customer relationship management. And I had never heard of this, never seen it, was never a concept in my mind. But I sat down and I read this brochure. And again, I fell in love. It's like, wow, this is amazing. You mean that everybody in our company would have the same information about a customer, and we could all act on the same source of truth? I thought this was remarkable. So I looked into it a bit more. I said to Kevin, yes, absolutely, we should migrate to the CRM technology. But not only that, I was so taken with this software that I called the company, which was based in Seattle. And I said to them, you need to hire me. Like this is amazing technology. You need to hire me. And I said, so I said, who's representing you in Canada? And they said some other company that was a distributor. And I said, take it from me. Distributors will never have the same agenda as you do. You need the direct salesperson representing you in Canada. They flew me out. I met with several executives and had a good rapport. So they hired me. And so I became a CRM evangelist. CRM was net new, it was brand new, it was and they had a nice little package. And I was just so passionate about bringing the virtues of CRM to the business world. And so I was doing this and starting to really make progress when I got a call from a headhunter that said there's another company called Vantiv that wants to talk to you. They're in this CRM space and they've heard about you and they want to meet with you. So I met with this guy. His name is Dick Travato. He's not with us anymore, but another great manager. And I can remember meeting him at the airport. And he just said this to me, Adrian, you're doing very well, but you're in the minor leagues. I'm offering you the opportunity to step up and play at a professional level. And it was true. Like the software we were selling was, $25,000, $50,000, maybe $100,000 would be a big deal. Vantiv was selling multi-million-dollar CRM systems. So I took the plunge and I joined them, and Dick was a great manager. And so here we are now selling these multi-million-dollar CRM systems. And again, I think because of my passion, I just leaned in. I really loved it, really enjoyed it. And I can remember a deal that we were closing, and it was at the end of the quarter. And it was a big deal. It was probably at the time maybe $1.5 million, but we really needed it to hit our number for the quarter. And Dick was so nervous. He kept calling me saying, Adrian, what do you think is going to happen with this deal? Is it going to close? Is it going to close? And so I looked at him and I said, Dick, don't worry. It's going to close. And I think it was like the day before the end of the quarter, it closed. And Dick was just so relieved. But I knew it closed. I knew it would close because of a perspective I was developing, and which really began at the very beginning, I think sort of why I was successful in sales, is I really focused on what is it that you want to, when I'm meeting with a customer, what is it that they want to accomplish? And then I just focused on how can I help them accomplish that? And that, if there's one thing that I did well from the very beginning of my career, it was that. I later went on to work for another company that was rather dysfunctional. And they would just push so hard for the salespeople just to sell and have basically no regard for their customers. And I had to part company with that company, although I was very successful, extremely successful with them. But I had to part company with them because of their lack of integrity. But it was working for that company in particular that I discovered the value of storytelling. Because they hired me, they had heard about me working at Vantiv. I was working in the telco space, and they were also in the telco space. And so that's how they heard about me, headhunted me. And they hired me. I was the only salesperson they had in Canada. All of their salespeople were in the States or in Europe. And their biggest competitor was headquartered in Canada, in fact, in Toronto. I almost turned them down because of that. But this was early days of internet, and this was an internet play. And I knew that the internet was going to be something. So I joined them, and I had no support and I had no successes, but my colleagues were successful. And so I went to a sales conference and I just asked them, where were you successful? And so they would share with me, and I would just jot down the gist of their stories in the back of my planner. And I started to tell their stories, and it was remarkable. These were very complex mission critical billing systems that are hard to fully explain. But I would just simply tell a story of what we had done for somebody similar to the person I was selling to. And their eyes would light up and they would lean in. And again, these were multi-million-dollar systems that we were selling that I would know the moment the sale was, or the purchase was made. It was just something that would light up. And then of course we have to go through the paperwork and the rest, and but the deal was made on the heels of a successful story. And I've heard the saying, big doors swing on small hinges. And then the small hinge is the story. And everything can change with a well-told story. So, I left that company because of integrity issues. And I started Whetstone. And I learned from a journalist this whole concept or framework called the hero's journey. And it blew me away. I just thought, that's why stories work. That's why I've been successful. And so that is one of the fundamental frameworks that we really build our whole interventions around, that helping companies understand and helping sales professionals understand, you're not the hero. Your company's not the hero. Your products and services and solutions are not the hero. The customer is the hero. And it's a very, it's a simple framework, but it's a very profound framework. And when we get organizations and then sales professionals to make this shift, everything changes. It's such a fundamental shift. It's not an easy shift, but it's a fundamental shift that changes everything. This is one of our 6 fundamental principles. Make the customer the hero. I've just jotted the others here that I want to talk about on this journey that we go through together. The second is to lead with empathy and insight. The third, build disciplined habits. And it's amazing how much depends on discipline. And so we'll talk about that. Measure what matters. And if you're not able to do this, sometimes you're gaining traction. You know you're going to be successful, but there's no measurement to prove it. And so initiatives end up being aborted because of that. We'll talk about that. Also, coaching for transformation. So how sales leaders can coach their people for transformation. And finally, to champion from the top. That these changes that I'm advocating for, although they're simple, they're profound. And although they're simple, to really magnify the impact of these interventions, it's a whole of company approach, ideally, or certainly a whole department approach. It's not the individual. There's only so much we can do with the individual. They need support behind them. So this podcast, The High Stakes Customer, is really about the things that I have learned on this journey, what I've learned working with global, Fortune 1000, Fortune 500, even Fortune 100 companies, the impact that I've seen them have with these frameworks. And I just feel this is so much a part of me. It's a part of my life that I just feel honored that you're here, that you want to lean in, that you want to have a greater impact on your customers. And I just feel very honored and privileged that I can perhaps play a small role in making that change for you to get you to operate at the next level with your high stakes customer. Again, I'm Adrian Davis. This podcast is The High Stakes Customer, and I'm looking forward to having you on this journey.